Boom.
Boom.
This is great.
Yeah. Look at that. I got the reverse angle. It's better than what's behind the camera. That's the thing.
Yeah, I don't have that luxury. I can't set it. If I set it up that way, then I can't look at the screen while I do it. I have to be like over here and be like, hey, I have to set up the... Anyway.
Yeah, I just do it on my phone.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So a call might come through, you're saying?
Yes, yeah. I might get a call halfway through. I don't know if it's going to come through. It should come through, but you never know. You never know.
Okay, well, I don't want to... You're a busy, successful person. And I don't want to take up too much of your time. So let's just get started. The nice thing about you, Daniel James, is that you have
nice
among the many nice things about you is that you have a huge, I shouldn't let that linger too long, digital footprint. Yeah. So I don't have to do the whole like, where are you from? You know, what was your favorite toy growing up? Do you like cake? We can just cut right into it.
Right. Yeah.
So, but we do have to start somewhere. So I'm wondering if we could just start with the Cubase thing. What makes Cubase worth the switch?
Worth the switch? Oh, so I actually did a video on this. I don't know if you've seen it yet or not, but so I used to use Ableton Live, and I was getting to the point. Well, Ableton Live's good. First off, you know, don't get me wrong. I still use it for sound design and things, but the projects I was doing, and this started around when I was working on Metal Gear Solid 5. I started working on projects that needed, it needed 5.1. It needed lots of dense orchestral work and things like that. And the problem is in Ableton Live, its MIDI functions, even though it is like a decent MIDI, it's got a decent MIDI sequencer in it. It has some things in it that are just unforgivable. Let's put it that way. So for like not being able to edit multiple MIDI clips at once is the most heinous crime it can do. So when you're working on like an orchestral thing, and I'm sure you've written some orchestral pieces yourself, you can run into MIDI counts of like 80 tracks or something. You know, they're not normally all playing at the same time, but you'll end up with like 20 playing at the same time or something like this.
Sure.
And if say I want to transpose a section, a lot of people who know me know that I love a good, modulation in the middle of my epic cues. Like, so if I wanted to like transpose everything up, say like by 3 semitones or something, in Ableton Live, I would have to go click 1 2 3, click 1 2 3, click 1 2 3, click 1 2 3. Whereas in Cubase, I can just select all the things 1 2 3, done.
Right.
Like there's the first thing. The second being the 5.1 thing. So what I was doing in Ableton, and this is what I did for Metal Gear, is that I would work in stereo. Do all my composition there, and then I would render stems and have to go into Cubase anyway because Ableton Live doesn't support 5.1, but Cubase does. So what I would do is export it as stereo stems, bring it into Cubase, where I would upmix to 5.1. And upmix is, for those who don't know, is just taking like a stereo file and basically making it 5.1. So there's no real 5.1 going on, you know what I mean? Like you can do some trickery with reverbs, you can do some there are actual upmixing plugins which add ambience to certain things, which essentially is like room reverb. But I realized that I was wasting time with that process because stemming out something large like that takes a good few hours. Well, not a few hours, that's a lie. It can take like 10 minutes to half an hour, or it can go up to an hour, depends how slow or how many plugins you've got on the thing, so it takes to render. But so the problem I was having is that it was just taking up too much time. So I thought, okay, I'll try writing my next score, which at the time I switched over when I started working on Monster High with Klaus Badal, which was the Mattel Universal thing. It's like a 3D animation film, but and I was in Japan when I did this. Sorry, I ramble a lot, but yeah, I was in Japan when I switched over.
People expect it, Daniel. It's fine.
I know. So yeah, that's when I switched over because I was like, well, I don't have the capacity to, be spending like I didn't have physical like space on hard drives and things because I just kind of moved to Japan on a whim.
Because you were doing the Nomad thing where it was kind of a nimble setup.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was working off a laptop with external hard drives. You know what I mean? And when you're rendering lots of stems, it takes up space and time, which I didn't have. I think I had 3 weeks for the first movie to compose it, and it was a feature-length score. So I didn't have time to faff about with stemming and re-upmixing. So I was like, okay,
with all the revisions and edits that go in too.
Oh yeah. It was a process, but that's what I'm saying. That's why I switched, and like, it took me 2 or 3 days, and like I think trial by fire is the best way to learn anything because you have to learn it. There's no excuses. So I just tried composing in that, and what I tried to do is I don't have a template per se in Ableton Live. What I had is like pre-mixed stem buses, but with empty instances of contact. So I would have like a strings bus that had a contact with nothing in it, but it had the reverb and the EQ settings that I generally use over and over again set up. So I set the same thing up in Cubase. And then once I'd learned the key commands, it was no different, really. I mean, and there was another plus in Cubase, is that I could assign custom key commands. So I changed all the key commands that I used all the time in Ableton to match Cubase. So it just felt like I was in Ableton Live with some of the key commands, which I still use today. Like whenever I go to someone else's Cubase setup, I fuck it up because I do a key command. Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I delete everything by accident instead of render track. You know.
Well,
so.
the other thing that Ableton can't do really well is SMPTE, and I was in. Do you know Sweetwater, that company?
Yep.
So I was doing a thing over there, Fort Wayne, Indiana. I don't want to brag, but I was there for work with Isotope, and I met the Ableton guys, and I was like, "Listen, I used to compose with Ableton, and now I moved to Logic." And they're like, "It's the SMPTE, isn't it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's kind of the SMPTE. It's way more than the SMPTE." But, and they're like, "Actually, let me show you really quick a really cool fix or whatever." And it was like 20 minutes later, and I'm like, "No one is going to do this," because I told them I had a channel. They're like, "Oh, you can just repeat the steps and show everyone." I'm like, "Guys, you have to move beyond the electronic DJ scene. Yeah. People are using this stuff to compose." And
things like, particularly when it comes to scoring for film. I mean, the other thing is not being able to dial in exact tempo changes. You know what I mean? Like you can do it, but you can't just enter a number.
No.
So if you know what number it is, you have to kind of edit it very fucking slowly. I remember actually I was working. I think it was like with Chris Lennox or something. He was pitching on something, and he wanted me, because I did some synth programming work for him back on Mass Effect. And I remember, what was it? So he sent me a demo and he wanted me to just kind of add some hybrid things to it or whatever. And he sent me
that's not like a sneaky plug to your company, is it?
Not yet. Okay. We'll get to that. No, but this was just as me as a composer. Not even like, I don't even think my company existed back then.
Okay.
But yeah. So he sent me a MIDI file, and the thing he did is he had like I forget the correct like Italian term, but he had it speed up and slow down, you know, like a kind of natural orchestral speed up and slow down. So he had these tempo ramps that were like this, so I couldn't just set tempo or whatever. And then I realized that for whatever reason, the MIDI files in Ableton, like when you import them, the tempo information wasn't coming with them. You know what I mean? So that was actually the project where I bought Cubase because I had to do it. And then what did I do? I think I like ran Ableton as a rewire thing, so that I could do all the sound design in Ableton while I was literally just using Cubase as a clock. You know what I mean? So it was, but the thing is, like you can't use thing. Right, but you can't use synths in Ableton when it's a rewire slave. So I ended up having to do that in Cubase, but the sound design in Ableton, it was a fuck up. But yeah, I mean, like that's the thing. Like I love Ableton Live. It's by far, in my opinion, like hands down the best when it comes to sound design. Like just the way. It becomes like an extension of body, because like let's say I'm doing a sound design. So again, we've gone off tangent, but like if say I'm doing a sound design or something, like, and I'm like, oh, I want to try the Faturator from Kilohertz or whatever. I just Command F and type in the name of the plugin, double click it, and it's on the track. You know, so there's no going to a different window, going down a list, because they've got an integrated finder built in. And then so then you can have like I think infinite amount of plugins on it, and they're all stacked along the bottom, so you can edit them. You can look at them and edit them, change the order, like while you're doing the sound design. And then when you create like a sound design like group, you know, like a set of plugins, you can save it as a rack, you know, and just drag it off to the side, put it in a user folder. Yeah, exactly. And then so when I'm working on other sounds, I mean, a lot of the time, if I find something cool, I remember like on Project Bravo, bringing it back around to my company, but when I was working on Project Bravo for my Hybrid 2 sample library, I in stores now, you know, it's what I ended up creating, like these like macro style things in Ableton, like for like impacts and whoosh bangs and stuff, and whatever I would put on it, it would just make it better. You know what I mean? Like it made the whole overall thing better. And I think there's something similar you can do in Cubase, but it's not as intuitive. But yeah, so like Ableton is great for some things. It's just when it comes to composing, as in like orchestral, or you know, it gets a bit clumsy in places, which is unfortunate. I mean, I did actually have a call with the Ableton guys, you know, like they're I guess like a research team, because they saw the video and they were like, so why did you make the change? I actually had this exact same conversation with them. And a lot of it came down to, when I think about it, a lot of it came down to things like key commands. Like a lot of the problems could be solved if I could just set it up how I wanted it.
Right.
Like things like rewind and fast forward, there's no key command for it, but you can do it on a Mackie controller, for example. So I was like, well, why can't I just set that up? Why can't I reset with this key? And, why do I have to use this setup?
It's kind of like Pro Tools, how it's more for mixing than it is for production. And in the same way, I don't remember who said it, but someone said that Ableton is not a DAW that you use, it's a DAW that you play. And I'm like, that's exactly what Ableton is. But if you're trying to use it, it's a bit of a, depending on the application, it can be a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah. It's not mixing friendly. It's good for writing in some circumstances. Like I say, like if you're doing electronic music, it's great. If you're doing sound design, it's great. It's just whenever you're doing something with multiple MIDI clips and multi-timbral stuff, it just becomes like clumsy, which is unfortunate. So I'm hoping in Ableton Live 10, if they don't call that Ableton, by the way, they're missing a trick. But when they come out with Ableton Live 10, I'm praying that they fix some of these, they add some Cubase-ish features to it, because I may consider switching. Like if I get 5.1, well, not all the time actually. I'm really comfortable with Cubase now, but if they add some of those, like switching back for electronic production, for example, like I'm doing a trailer album right now. And I'm hitting a lot of walls with sound design, where in Ableton it would just be dum 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 dum.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, okay, how the fuck do I do this?
I think with I don't know about you, but for me, Ableton was like my first love, and for that reason, I feel kind of sentimental about it. Like I just want it to get better. But
Same.
With the jobs that I have and with the work that I do, I just can't afford to waste time going online and going to the documentation and being like, how do I control, like Command F, and I just don't have that time now.
Oh yeah, I never read the manual. Like if you've ever seen one of my videos, like the way I kind of, because you're familiar with them, right?
Yes.
So I do like the overview videos of sample libraries or whatever, and I make it a point because I think I'm in the majority in saying that when I get something, I just start playing with it as opposed to learn it and then play it, right?
Sure.
So when I do the videos, I show. Oh Christ! Nearly pulled my phone over. I try and show. How I would use it, like when I get something, I just load it up and I play it. So it's a good way to see if something's unintuitive. I've taken some flack from certain sample library developers before because I'm like, this feature makes no sense, and they're like, well, if you read the manual, it'll make perfect sense. And I'm like, but I don't want to read the manual. I want to just look at it and go, okay, that's how that works. Which a lot of the time it does. And I like to think that even though they're mad at me, like because I won't name names, but the next library
you can say Isotope. You can say Isotope.
No. But like the next thing they made, that was fixed. You know what I mean? Like that.
Right.
That kind of element of it was intuitive now. So I feel like I helped to a certain degree. Like criticism, even though it hurts, often leads to better things. So I tried to be fair. I forget what the question was. I'm rambling. So you just have to interject at some point.
No. I think I don't want to because like this is okay. First of all, I just want to say this is like it's like a delight for me to be talking to you. So I don't want to cut you off.
Delight.
I've seen many of your videos. I don't think I go way back to the blog stuff, but
oh man, yeah.
But
I actually went back and watched them the other day. They're so cringy. It's funny because
you're really like stuffy and nervous.
It's more because you can tell. Yeah, exactly. You can tell I've never like been on camera before. I'm like, hey guys, Daniel James here, and
You're like, today.
And actually, I didn't used to do that. Like, I don't know when that became a thing, but it like whenever I go out to like events and stuff, and people are like, "Oh, you're Daniel James today," and they all say it like that.
Well, thing is, I do that on my channel. I'll be like, "Hey, Jeff Manchester Music, and today," and then that's it. That's the end of the impression of you, and people are always like, "Daniel James, hilarious."
Well, the thing I realized is you can probably see the point in my videos where I did it is because I always found it hard to start videos. I'd never know how. Like, there's this kind of like brain block that happens when you push record. You get ready, and then you push record, and you're like, okay. And so what I did is I just went, hey guys, Daniel James here, and today we're gonna do blah 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 blah. The way we're gonna do it is like this. So let's get on with it. And then once I had like a thing, then your brain switches from thinking mode into conversation mode, which I think is probably two different parts of the brain. And once like the ball is rolling, then you're just, you know what I mean? You're not thinking about what you're doing. Yeah. You're just explaining it. Like you've tapped into the other part of the brain for conversation. Whereas when you start and you're trying to just start, you're trying to think of what to say, which isn't how you have a conversation. You instinctively kind of respond to things.
Yeah, people don't know what they're going to say next.
Yeah, exactly. Until it starts coming out of their mouth. Sometimes that gets me in trouble because my mouth speaks faster than my brain can control the words.
But listen, this is a good thing, Daniel, because getting back to the delight, I want to compliment you just for a second, because it was you that.
Oh, go on.
I gotta find the right way to say this. It was you that convinced me to start the channel because I'm like, if he can do it, I can do it. And let me qualify that. Let me qualify. Like,
if this cunt can do it, I can do it.
No, what I mean by that is I'm the kind of guy that reads the manuals, right? So I'm very nerdy. I do my research, and I was looking at the landscape of like YouTubers, and I'm like, the reason I say if you can do it, I can do it is because I don't want to be like, hey guys, what's up? And like all the quick cuts. I don't want to affect a personality. So when I saw you just being you and people, no, but that's what I mean. So when I saw you just being yourself and like having fun and not editing everything and being like, oh, I fucked up. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's keep moving. I'm like, oh, it's okay for me to be myself and not have to worry about that. So that's what I mean when I say if this guy can do it, I can do it. So that's why I did it.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's like a lot of people, and I think particularly in entertainment industries like we're in, I think personality matters more. You know what I mean? It's so that. being who you are is a benefit as opposed to a negative. You know, and there's a lot of people who dislike what I do. You know, like I don't think there's a single video that doesn't have the God, you talk too much. Like God, why didn't you cut this bit out? You know, and I'm like, because I can't be asked. And that's just who I am. You know what I mean? It's and I also find that it kind of helps because when you edit videos, people will start to accuse you of shilling. Sure. You know what I mean? Like I get some libraries for free to do reviews with, some I don't, some I pay for. I never say which is which because then people start to imagine things in there. Oh, he only said this because he paid for it, or he only said this because he got it for free. And that's why when I do the videos, I never cut away from what I'm doing, because if I'm fucking up, you're seeing why I'm fucking up. Mm-hmm. You know, if I'm hitting a block with the UI, like if something's not intuitive, you're seeing me struggle with it. If you know, like, so I'm not pulling the wool over your eyes, kind of thing. You know, whereas if I edit away from a bad part of it, or if something starts phasing, I think I did. What was it? There was a video, and this wasn't actually their fault. I'll clarify this. It was a Heaviosity video. I think it was the metal drums or something. Okay. And I was trying to show the sound design thing, and Contact had this bug at the time where depending on how it was programmed, and a lot of libraries were programmed this way, so it wasn't exclusive to Heaviosity, if they put a lot of things in the automation tab and it went past a certain amount, when you moved one dial, it moved all the other dials at the same time to 100. so like you could go back and watch it. I think it's the Heaviosity Master Drums Metals. I think that was the one it was.
They did wood, and they did another one, I think. But in that series, okay.
But in that video, you see, I go to move one dial, and all the sound just goes, and it scares the shit out of me. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people would just cut away from that entire scenario and come back. And I'm like, no, this is important to show, because at the time, you know, obviously without doing any research, I assumed it was the library. So I'm just not going to touch this again. But it turned out it was a Contact issue. I think there was another one as well. I think it was a Spitfire. I think it was Albion 1 actually, and like the percussion had so many phase issues.
Was that the reboot I'm not or the original?
The reboot one. And like the percussion section, I think they fixed it now. I haven't updated mine because I just haven't had the time to fiddle with everything. But at the time when I did the video, like I would load up the percussion patch. And pretty much every single patch, like on the third or fourth round robin, you would just get like a phase. You know what I mean? It would be so they were essentially unusable. And so and you saw that in the video. You know, like I didn't sugarcoat that. I said that's unusable. Like this is a thing. And what was the other one? Like with the Hans Zimmer percussion one. Like that is a great library, but like at the time it was like being promoted as one thing. And it was actually something else. Like it was a really, really good percussion library, but it was being pitched as like a big trailer, epic thing. And it wasn't like, you know what I mean? When I hear that, I assume like really over processed and really punchy and things like that, which it wasn't. Yeah. And, you know, like I went into that kind of thing, you know, and these are the things I do in the videos, you know, I go into the parts that I dislike about it. And that, you know, I went into that, which like, and worth mentioning now, Hans Zimmer Percussion, since the Junkie XL mixes, those mixes are trailerish, you know what I mean? They're big and punchy and processed. So now it is promised. So that video is a bit out of date, but like I haven't gone back to, you know, do it. I'm behind on videos I should be doing already.
Well, no, but for good reason, because you're like busy and living out the dream. You know what I mean?
Living the dream. It's fucking hot. Sorry, I live in the middle of Santa Monica. I don't have AC.
Getting back to sort of cringing at old videos and stuff like that, can you play the Phantom Pain and like fucking not listen to the music? Or do you put on mute and just keep the sound effects on? Yeah, like when you play it, can you listen to what you've done and just play the game, or are you just listening to your music?
I'm okay. So in most projects, like I try not to go back and watch them too much because I cringe at music. Like I'd say like a year is the threshold. Anything older than a year, I start to cringe at. Anything within that time, I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And then a year later, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I knew fuck all. But like the Phantom Pain, because the project meant so much to me,
sure,
like that music will always be golden to me. Like I look back at it now and I think, I could have done so much better if I'd have known what I know now then. I mean, but like I think everybody gets that. But the project was so special to me just because like that's the whole reason I got into composing. It was so special to me that like I will play it and, you know, like I'll be doing the Eli boss battle, which was one of my cues, and just be like, yeah, fuck you, Eli. Because it's my music and I'm just, you know, happy. And that's what I say. It's like, that was actually like, I thought that was a lofty goal when I said it, like when I started composing, working on Metal Gear. And now that I've done it, everything I do is just a bonus, which makes choosing projects a lot easier. You know what I mean? It's a lot of pressure off my shoulders because I could die tomorrow and be like, yep, I did what I wanted to do. So,
well, that was one of the questions I had for you is like, what is one of your tracks that's out there in the wild, maybe with Metal Gear Solid or something else, that you're always trying to top, if that even makes sense to you? Is there one that you're always like, I'll never do better than that, but I always want to try and do better than that because I love that song and you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. There was I wrote a good one on an epic score album called Gravity, which was actually, I did it for a Gravity overview video. That one was pretty good. There was one I made called Cybernetic Haze, which was also, there's 3 songs I can think of off the top of my head. There's probably more, and they're all on epic score albums. And I think the reason I like them is because when I do like an epic score album, it's just whatever I want to do basically. So long as it's epic and score, I am good to go. You know, so I get to try new things and be whimsical. The 3 that it used to be, actually, I changed it. Used to be Cybernetic Haze, which was an Action Strings overview video. Gravity, which was a Gravity overview video. And then Strength to Believe, which was the title track of the album Strength to Believe. All 3 were melodic. But I just did a project, again, with Klaus Badal. Again, I don't know if I'm supposed to say what the project is. It's you know, nothing.
If you're under NDA, then, you know, don't. But I know.
Yeah. I'm not good at it, but like I keep saying, I can't talk about it, but you know, and people are like hyping up like it's going to be the biggest thing ever. It's just a project I don't know if I can talk about yet. But the music I wrote on that, I think tops it.
Okay.
Because it was like a combination of all my like big percussion writing, and when I did the Monster High thing, I kind of it was like I did that for a whole year because I did 2 feature-length films in that Monster High universe, and it was very musical. You know, it was very melodic and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I had to learn to get very John Powell-y very quickly. You know,
right.
like that
it was less sort of like rise and hits and impacts and
exactly.
LFE
so
stuff.
So the hybrid muscles went into atrophy, and but the melodic muscles came through strong. So when I came to do this thing, which had a little bit of hybrid, it gave me the opportunity to, you know, get that muscle going again. But also it was like super melodic, and some of the melodies I wrote, I think were some of the best ones I wrote, and it was recorded live at air, you know, which made it sound even better. So like now I listen to these are the ones to top.
Right.
And like I came back off a short break to get married last month, and I was away for a month. By the way. Thank you very much.
You can now introduce her your wife as your ex-girlfriend when you go and meet people, which throws people off. You can be like, this is my ex-girlfriend, because she's now your wife.
I see what you mean. I
think I might get married just so I can make that joke.
That's a good technicality. I never thought of it that way.
You're welcome.
But anyway, so yeah, I took a month off.
Yeah.
And so yesterday was the first day back at work, essentially. And the music I wrote there left a lot to be desired mix wise. Just because when you're away from it for a bit, the muscles kind of, like a runner. If you haven't run for a month, your legs are going to be a little bit sore.
It's like going back to the gym after a while. It's just,
Oh, yeah. It's a painful experience, but, you just have to battle through it, which I'm doing. But, oh, God, it needs a bit of work, but I'm getting there. Slowly but surely.
Are you mixing? This is a weird question, because now you're sort of on another sort of, you're going to laugh at me now, like you're on another level. Are you mixing?
I've transcended.
You have. I don't know why you're slumming with me on this channel. You're too good for it. You were mixing your stuff before, I'm assuming. Maybe you were mastering it too. Do you now get to hand it off to a mixing engineer for the mix down?
Well, the funny thing is that like, so yes is the answer to the question. Like the short answer, yes, I mix and master everything at the minute. There's been 2 times that I've had a budget for a mixer, but they liked the mixes of the demo so much they just said, okay, can you just master this up and finish it off? Which is always flattering to hear, you know what I mean? Because the thing I do is I always just kind of mix it as I go, because I can't stand to have a clashing frequency. Like, it just bothers me, you know what I mean? Almost from a human sensibility. It's like, if something should I tell you what it's like when I'm working? It's like when you have a painting and it's just slightly off center,
off kilter.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So you're like, you know what? I'm just gonna. There we go. Just fix that for you. That's what it's like. So like if I'm writing string parts and they're clashing and there's like a sound, I'm like, I'm just gonna go in and just cut that out, because otherwise I won't be able to carry on working. And I do that for the whole process. And by the time I get to the end, the levels are all balanced. The EQ's all balanced. The compression's all balanced. So all it really needs then is just like a final EQ, compression, and limit phase, and that's it. I mean, and that's what
But don't you
half
find
an hour? If that.
The shitty thing is that when you go to center that picture, that portrait, when you go to fix a frequency, audio is such a give and take, because now that you've maybe decreased the low end so that the mid range is more present, like something else is out of the way, and you're like, I gotta go fix that. And the more moves you make, it's like you're taking two. Does that ever happen? Like 2 steps back for every step forward?
Yeah. I think it's more a case of. I just get it to a point where it's bearable, and like so long as it gets bearable to the end, the amount I have to fix for the mix at the end is so minimal. It's almost don't even need to worry about it. It's negligible. It's is that the word? I think so. But like I've already kind of got it there, and then it's like, okay, well this isn't strong, so then you do the mix phase. But because it's already balanced, I can do broad strokes as opposed to micro ones. Because I do the micro ones to get rid of the annoying things, like I say, like those resonant frequencies or whatever. But then once I have those, I tend to work more just macro based. So, I mean, most of the time when I mix macro anyway. And by that, I mean, I treat strings as one sound. Like if the violins are clashing with, like the brass or whatever, I don't go in and EQ the violin. Usually I'll EQ the actual section, which can dull some of the other instruments. But I find in the end, there's less faffing about, because it just kind of takes the bit you need, and it doesn't really change if it changes the tone too much, then I'll go into, the individual parts and mix them. But most of the time I just do it on a macro level, because I find that the micro level, it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? No one notices except for me, and I don't give a shit.
Yeah, it's sort of like EQing in solo. It's such a pointless exercise when you're EQing everything. Just have everything sort of off and EQ with the entire. I don't know. It's project to project, but
yeah. I mean, like, so I EQ in solo, but like I say, I EQ in solo as a group. So like I'll look at the strings and I'll EQ the string group in solo, for example, and get the string group sounding good, without changing the macro. So I'll just put an EQ on the thing and cut out the bits, or like a dynamic EQ, which is essentially a multi-band compressor. But like a dynamic EQ, and just pull those bits. Like because I always put a reverb on a group anyway. And the way I tried to describe it once in numbers on a video, and people tore me to shreds. But it's like when you put a reverb, you're kind of doubling the frequencies that exist, because that's what it's doing. It's repeating them, like in the real world.
And the amplifier,
so like say all your frequencies except 500 hertz are at 1 and 500 hertz is at 2. When you put a reverb on, everything's going to be 2 except for 500 hertz, which is now going to be 4 because it doubled it. And you want that back down at like a 3 or a 2.5. That's kind of how I deal with resonant frequencies, because it kind of stacks up when you layer things. So I just do the group and just do a big like carve out of the frequencies until they're all kind of level. Most of the time, like, people are always like, yeah, but you can see this is peaking, and I'm like, well, it doesn't sound like it is. So, if it sounds good, it is good usually. That's like the best rule of thumb. Like, if your ears say this is all right, regardless of what the computer looks like,
well, that's the thing.
I go with it.
Now that I work for Isotope, like, I get to see, like, we put so much emphasis on visual feedback, and like you could see if you did like a little chronological thing of like our products, you could see the visual feedback thing increasing, and like the, you know what I mean? So
yeah, I like the masking thing on Neutron. That's what it's called, Neutron. Yeah, where you do the masking EQ, like, and it's like pink, and I'm like, okay, I'll cut that one out. I'm sorry, and that's really cool because like it's showing essentially where they're canceling each other out the most, right? That's kind of what it's doing.
Yeah, I guess the super nerdy way is like we're shining a flashlight in areas where there might be psychoacoustic masking. Sometimes it's complementary, like when two people sing at the same time, it's a nice sort of tone that amalgamates, but. Yeah, the pink shoots or the northern lights, which is the sort of flashy white stuff that you see, that's more just like, hey, maybe take a look over here where there might be some masking.
Yeah.
Not that it's a problem, just time, like have a look.
Yeah, I always put it on and I'm like, yeah, that's that, because a lot of the time I kind of hear where something's kind of messing up, like when I layer things together, like resonant frequencies, like I said earlier, the number's gone from 2 to 6 instead, while everything else has gone from 1 to 2, and like I know there's a problem. So instead of doing like a bell sweep, like I just put that on and I'm like, okay, it's happening between these two there. That's exactly where it is. And I'd say 90% of the time it's spot on, which is good. Got to love that Isotope.
Thanks, Daniel James.
You are welcome, Jeff.
Daniel James was worth every penny on that one. The check's in the mail.
Whole £5.
Could we, which is like, I don't know, maybe like $50 Canadian. Our dollar is pathetic. Could we talk about the artistic side of things? I'm wondering,
sure.
I get a question a lot, which is, I'm going to find a way to twist it out to you. How do you keep your artistic voice as a composer intact as you construct a piece of music for someone else's vision? You know what I mean? How does your voice not get buried under there when you're a hired gun?
I think your voice is mostly just your experience and like your muscle memory in a way. It's like I will always sound like me because I will always do things right the same way and I'll always do things wrong the same way, regardless of what the project is. So, and you end up coming up with these kinds of, the way I describe it is you have, as a composer, you draw from the subconscious, right? When you write, there's no such thing in humanity as an original thought, right?
No.
Which sounds like a grand claim. But it's like, you think about anything that's ever been made,
it's
it had
totally
to have steps.
Yeah,
it had to have steps that came before it. So what I do is I try to load the subconscious with as much as I can, right? And then I draw, so I listen, listen, watch, play everything I can. And it all goes into the subconscious. So when I'm writing, all I'm doing essentially is thinking of like they'll say, I want this to feel like this. Like, if I'm watching a movie, they'll say, I want this scene to feel like this. And then I go into the subconscious bank of things and I think, okay, where have I had this emotional response that matches their vision? And then all that goes through my muscle memory and my mistakes and things. So the notes will always kind of sound like me, I think, unless you're like someone who intentionally tries to sound like someone else. Like there's a lot of Hans Zimmer clones, for example. Usually when you hear a new composer, you can categorize them. This is a Zimmer composer. This is a Williams composer.
Yeah.
Because they haven't found their own voice, because they're just trying to recreate other people's music, which to me, usually suggests they don't have enough in the subliminal bank as they should have. So they only listen to Zimmer or they only listen to John Williams. Whereas I try to expose myself to as much as possible. That way there's more to draw from. It's because there's no original thoughts. I can come up with an original combination. That's all you can do.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, I like why I had this emotional response to this piece of music, so I'll borrow that element. And then this other piece of music, I also felt the same way, but so I'll borrow something like that. And it's not so much stealing from these things. It's just the idea, the inspiration, behind why that works. Why does that particular thing that composer's doing work against that? Okay, I understand why it's working. Now I can do that. And so the notes almost don't matter.
It's sort of Oh, sorry.
It's not what you say. Sorry, it's not what you say. It's how you say it. That's all that really matters in composition.
The other one I love is it's not where you steal. It's not where you take from. It's where you take it to. And with Hans Zimmer, like for example, a way to sort of take from and then take it to is like he does a lot of Shepherd tone shit. And if anyone doesn't know, just Google it. But I think a healthy example of borrowing from Hans Zimmer would be to take that and be like, okay, how can I find a way to put it into what I'm doing in a different voice, in a different way? And then usually experimenting with that leads you to some other place. But you started with like, oh, Hans Zimmer does this thing. The shitty thing is that sample library companies and all this stuff, they're kind of aware of who the big players are, and it's almost like the marketing, like you said, with the Hans Zimmer drums and all that stuff. Like, they're aware of who the big guns are in the composing scene, and they're just churning out libraries, marketing them like, you want to be the next Hans Zimmer? Like, this is the library for you, or this is whatever. And now I find we're kind of getting into more of like a Johan Johansson place, where it's more like you want to do like a 40-minute F sharp pad, you know what I mean? Which is pretty cool. But I feel like the marketing is kind of informing and reinforcing in a kind of feedback loop sort of way.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing with those. I mean, like we never, because as you mentioned earlier, like I own a sample library company. The aim for us when we make our sample libraries is never to market it as like sound like this. Well, most of the time it would be sound like Daniel James, because I can only make sound design like I make it. That's not the point of it. So you'll notice with our libraries, we're always like, these are the sounds we'll give you, like go crazy with them. They'll sound like me, or they'll sound like Aaron, who's my business partner. But instead take a look at the user interface we've given you, and like you can change it to be like you, make it fit for you. Because the thing you'll find, like with that sample libraries kind of miss this, or at least they don't advertise it, because it would do them, they wouldn't sell anything, is that the successful composers are the ones who don't sound like the libraries that sound like them anymore. So they're constantly evolving and constantly changing their sound. They're constantly, well, like I say, they're not focusing on sounding like them. They're focusing on, okay, like I mentioned earlier, why does this work? Like, how can I give that emotional response? How can, like I had when I listened to this? And a lot of the time it's drawn from somewhere else in their subconscious. They very, you do sometimes, but not very often does one draw from their own work. You don't listen to your own work that much in a listening perspective. So like you do sometimes, but that comes down more to muscle memory than drawing from the subconscious. Like that worked last time, so if I need it again, I can draw on it. But like, so Hans Zimmer's never going to try and sound like Hans Zimmer, whereas everybody who's got the sound, the Hans Zimmer percussion libraries and this or big epic trailer thing, sound like this. Those guys aren't thinking like that. They're thinking, and I don't presume to speak for them, but I assume that they're not sitting there thinking, I need to sound like Hans Zimmer, like that's what sells. They're thinking, okay, I need to, do this film that's set in France. Or what instruments would go in France? Like an accordion, or maybe some, like a solo violin or something like this. And it will sound like them, but not like them. Like it won't, like Hans Zimmer doing a new score won't sound like Hans Zimmer, but it will sound like him. Yeah. Does that make sense? It won't sound like anybody else trying to do Hans Zimmer, but it will sound like Hans Zimmer. So it's because he does things right the same way, he fucks things up the same way, but he doesn't sound like the last time he did it, because he's not trying to do that. Whereas everybody who tries to sound like Hans Zimmer will only be able to draw from his previous scores,
Yes.
And they're not going to fuck things up the same way as he does. They're not going to do things right the same way he does every time. So they, you can only go as far as their past, by which point they're already going forward. So I think it's more important to learn what, like you said, like developing your own voice by working out what you emotionally react to, and then just using your own skills to make it. That's what you should focus on. Not like, oh, I like this guy, I'm going to steal from that guy.
I had this thing where I was composing, is one of the first short films that I did, and I don't know if this ever happened, I'll just say it. I had this, sure. I mentioned in the video, I was writing the cue, and like I started to cry as I was writing it. It's ridiculous, but I did, and to me that was like the best indication that what I was doing was not good, but like worth pursuing, because if it matters to you, then like if you give a shit, then like you're more likely to own it and fight for it and keep pursuing it, than if it's sort of like a sound-alike competition and you're going back and referencing like that composer's score, and then you like, okay, that sounds like him. But if you're surprised and delighted and maybe emotional by something that you've done, then chances are you're going to own it and be proud of it. And also chances are someone, when they listen to it in the film, might get emotional because, you know, if it makes you cry, it might make someone else cry.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever cried.
That's a weird, fucked up, nebulous example, but I had to share it.
No, but well, I'm British, so I'm emotionally repressed anyway. But no, I've definitely had pieces of music where I've done like a big epic chord change, like modulation or something, and I felt like the goose pimples. So I understand what you mean. But I think to some people that matters. I don't know, like, if I've ever gone, this is why I do it, you know, like when I get that, I'm like, oh, I'm doing something right, you know, like I'm more surprised that like, oh, I enjoyed myself for a second, which is a weird sentence, but it's more like I don't know if this is you know, a product of like my upbringing or the way it is, but usually I'm very I'll write something and I'm more surprised that other people like it, if that makes sense.
Let's get into your childhood, Daniel.
Yeah. No. But it's more because when I write things, I'm trying to do something different. I'm trying to do something that I've not done before. And so it's very hard to like it straight away because I'm not used to it, you know? So I'm like, does this work? And, you know, and when I get a yes from a director or, you know, from an audio director or something, I'm like, okay, so that was good. That was good. Okay, we'll add that to the bank of skills, you know, like that's something I can learn. But then the next time, I mean, that's why I always struggle when I do like these trailer albums, for example. Like I'm writing one right now and I'm back where I was last time I wrote one, is because like trailer music particularly has got quite saturated with a lot of tracks that sound very similar to each other. And so when I'm tasked with writing a new album, my first instinct is I don't want to do that. You know, like I want to like that's what people are expecting it to be. How can I do that without it being that? You know, so that's obviously a tough thing to overcome. So like right now I'm doing ones with vocals, you know, like me singing, which, you know, isn't pleasant, but they'll get replaced by a singer.
You've got that choir boy voice, that St. Paul's Cathedral's Gregorian chanting stuff.
The Hodor. Yeah, anyway, Hodor. But that's what I'm saying. So I'm trying new things, but when I listen back to it, I don't cringe. It's just I get surprised when people listen to it and they're like, oh, okay, like that's new. And I think that's one of the hard things because like as a composer, like if you ever know what you're doing, you're not doing anything new. You know, if you already know what you're doing, it probably means it's been done before or you've done it before, and you know, like it's coming easy to you. That's why it's, you know what you're doing. So when people ask like, how do you do it? It's like, I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time because I'm trying to do something new, which means there's nothing to draw from. Like, so I always like a lot of my music will have something I've done before and then a load of shit I haven't done before. But all I hear is that like, oh, I hope they don't think it's shit.
That's one of the fucked up things about doing videos. Is why I don't do. There's some people out there that will do like, you know, like 5 hours no talking videos, just me composing. I can't do it because if anyone had like a bird's eye view into like what I go through when I come up with something new, like it bring someone to tears.
Yeah,
because it's constant repetitive. Like, oh, that sucked. Oh, that sucked. I should become an architect. And then I just leave and I come back and then I keep writing, and it's just that over and over and over. But I find that. And I heard. I don't know if you know the band LCD Sound System. Have you heard of those guys?
I think I've heard of it, but anyway, I haven't heard them.
When David Bowie was alive, he was good friends with the frontman James Murphy, and James was asking David Bowie like, should I reboot the band because they quit a while ago. They played a huge set at like Madison Square Gardens and came back. He's like, should I? He's like, I have a lot of things I want to sing and do and everything, but I don't know if I have the ideas. I don't know if they're there. I don't know if it's weird or whatever. And Bowie was like, if it makes you uncomfortable, you should do it because you're probably going to work really hard. And I find that when I'm uncomfortable with the direction of something, I just want to figure it out like it's a math problem that I can't solve. So I'm just on the verge of getting it. I'm gonna bask in the uncomfortable bullshit that is this cue, and usually I emerge victorious and I'm like, stuck through it. That was awesome. You're right that if it's too safe, it's probably not worth doing, or it's something you've done before.
Oh yeah. Like if you sit down and you know exactly how like this cue is going to sound like that, it means that you haven't done any of the creative work yet, like you say, because not knowing is a very uncomfortable feeling. So if you're sitting there staring at it going, I have no idea what to do, that's probably a good start, because if you sit there and go, okay, this is what it's going to be, it means that you're relying too much on the subconscious. The subconscious is going, hey, this worked in that cue, why don't you just use that? And you're like, okay, you know, that's stealing. Whereas like the when I talk about the subconscious, I'm not talking about taking things that other people have done and then using them. I'm saying looking at what they did and figuring out why that worked. Why did that drone work? Like, why was that the thing that made it feel scary? Well, the drone itself had this kind of texture to it. It was doing this kind of progression. It was in this kind of mode. Okay, so I don't need that drone, but I need something that has a similar kind of tone. Like, I like the tone idea, or I like the way that it modulates. Let's look into why that modulates. You know what I mean? And that's the problem solving. And that's the bit where the uncomfortable bit comes, because you have to figure these bits out. And a lot of the time they're tricky. You know what I mean? They're tricky to figure out.
But I think that, it's like, why was that idea successful? And then and then you're like, I'm going to try and incorporate that same kind of success in a different way with what I learned from that moment.
Yeah, I'm not going to use what they wrote to make mine better. I'm going to figure out why what they wrote worked, and then take all those elements of why it worked and then create something new that will work. You know what I mean? But yeah, a lot of the time that isn't obvious at first. So a lot of the time I sit there with a blank page going, I have no fucking idea what to do with this. and then it is a case of going, okay, well, it emotionally needs to feel like this. And I've seen this film and played this game and listened to this piece of music that all made me feel that way. So what's the common denominator between these things?
Sure.
Okay, so they all did this. Okay, so we need some of that. And they all kind of had this feeling. Okay, and then it's just a process of building all those common denominators together in, like I say, like the things I do right and the things I do wrong. And that's why it will sound like me. I feel like I keep going back to that, but I feel it's important. But yeah, so it all comes down to that, essentially,
And also, I'm wondering for you, when you look at the notes from the spotting session that you had with the director, is it helpful or unhelpful when the director has written, when the director, I know how I feel about this, when the director is a composer and they're like, do this, and anyway, or is it more helpful when the director has written the word like delicate and then you're like, okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's trickier with new people. Like I work with Ryan Connolly a lot, who does Film Riot, which is a YouTube channel. And like we've done a few things together now. So when he says something like, I don't think he would use the word delicate, but like when he says something like that's an emotional word, I'm like, okay, I understand what he means by that. But sometimes what he means by delicate doesn't mean delicate to the other person. So like if they get the more specific they are with what they actually want it to be, the easier it is for me, I find. Because at the end of the day, unless I'm writing music for myself, it's their music. So I'm usually not too bothered like with temp tracks or, with direction, very specific direction. Like if they want it to be a certain thing, I will do it up to a limit. I won't rip things off. Like I won't just copy something. I will, like if they tell me it needs to do something more specific to what this piece of music's doing, like again, I'll go back and try and figure out why it's doing that in the first place. And if I can do something similar without stealing it, then I'm okay to do that. Like I've had comments that like, can you just make it more Harry Gregson Williams? Can you make it more Hans Zimmer? Can you make it more John Williams? And I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by more Harry Gregson Williams? Well, like a bit more of the synth texture, or with Hans Zimmer, a bit more of the French horn, and when you break down what they actually want, it's like that isn't just the specific Hans Zimmer thing. If you said you want the French horns to be broader, if you want them to be, more aggressive, I understand that. You can use your words just use your words. But yeah, like, because a lot of the time they associate emotional with like a certain type of person, which is not very unhelpful a lot of the time. I mean, sometimes it is a shorthand. Like if I work with a director for a while and they're like, do this, do the Zimmery thing. They don't mean do the Zimmery thing. They don't want it to sound like Batman. They mean they want like more French horns. They want it more brooding. They want it more dark. And, I understand that. And I can do it without it sounding like Hans Zimmer. Like that's the point. But they, so a lot of the time people kind of like, particularly when it comes to things like temp tracks, which a lot of people, give a bad rap to. I don't mind them because when I listen to it, a lot of what my job is figuring out, like we've been talking about over and over again, is why does it work? Like, why is that making the scene work? So I don't see it as them going, I'll rip this off. And if I do something and they're like, yeah, I prefer the temp better, that doesn't mean they want me to rip the temp off closer. I mean, sometimes it does, but a lot of the time it doesn't mean they want me to rip the temp off closer. It means I'm off the base with why it worked.
Right.
Because if I can figure out why it worked and write something new, they would, you know what I mean? It should click for them too.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of times where they thought that just do the temp. And then I write something that's completely different to the temp, but works in the same way.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I actually prefer this. You know, it's just a case of getting over that kind of why things work element, you know, to the whole thing.
I had a friend of mine that was submitting music. I think it was library music, or it was music for like commercials, and they usually send it's like a cattle call. They'll send the reference track out to like 20 composers,
right?
And, like, write something like this, and like I think like 19 out of the 20 composers wrote something exactly like the reference music, and one person, well, not exactly but close, and one composer wrote something that was totally unlike the reference track, and they picked his. And I think it's for the reasons that were maybe exhausting to death, because it sounded different, but the emotion, the ideas that were successful in the reference track were carried over, and it was successful in the same way, but totally different sounding. But it had the same,
yeah.
Okay, we're coming up on 50 minutes here. I don't want to eat up too much of your time.
It's all right. We've got plenty of time.
Okay. I want to talk about the most recent event in your, not the marriage, but the most recent event in your life, composing life. I want to talk about being at Air Studios. I want to talk about how you got there and what the experience was like. And I back it up a little. Were you composing a lot for orchestras, or was it usually just mixing and mastering really sort of elaborate mock-ups? Well, just
Well, I got there by plane. No, sorry.
The John Lennon answer.
Yeah, so like before this project, I'd never written anything for live other than soloists, you know, so the odd thing here or there. So this was the first like full orchestral recording I'd ever done. So, you know, I learned a lot very quickly. Like I say, trial by fire is always the best way to do it. But luckily for me, like this was another project with Klaus, who has experience and has a team already in place that he uses for these types of things. So we use his orchestrator. I don't know if I can even say the guy's name. Again, I don't. This is one of those projects, you know. I'm always a bit iffy. But we used his orchestrator, and I have one of my own.
It's fine.
It's all good. Well, let me tell you the real secrets then. No, I have my own guy who works for me called Andrew Osano, who did some like extra orchestrations for me. So I just wrote the same way I always write. You know, like I focus on not making it playable, not making it real, just making it sound the best it can be. And then I give that to the orchestrator, and by giving that, I render out a MIDI file essentially with everything in the right place. And he would just look at it and say, okay, if we did this with the strings, that would work. If we did that with the, you know, if we took that brass bit and put it on this instrument, or, you know, just had like the tuba play that instead of like this monster patch you have here. And so he went away and did all that. So I did no real orchestration, and I always feel weird about that. So like if you listen to the synth demo I did of it, it's a finished piece of music, and it's orchestrated, but it's not orchestrated for live players. You know, like there's brass layered with other brass which match, you know, and are layered with strings. So it's orchestrated in that respect, but it's not orchestrated. You know, it's not written for players. So it went to the orchestrator who figured out how to make it playable live. Then, you know, obviously goes to a copyist so that you've got the piece of music. And yeah, so it was the first time I'd ever done it. And then when I listened back to the you know, them play it live for the first time, it was a great experience first off. But like a lot of the time when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, okay, so now the strings are doing that and that, which means that when I have the samples, I can drop those samples, and you know what I mean? So I was listening to it more of a mix thing than a compositional thing, because in my mind, like what I was having recorded wasn't going to replace anything. It was going to be another part to the mix. So I was kind of I was kind of listening to it like I would a sample in a weird way. You know, I was listening back to it like, okay, get them to play that again, because that string bit there wouldn't work with what I'm going to do with it. So it was interesting, because I thought it would be more of a different experience in terms of like, I thought it would be not more magical, but, you know, it would just be different. But when I was listening to it, it was no different. My brain was working no differently than it usually does. I knew the piece that I was working on. I knew the piece they were recording, and I kind of knew how that puzzle piece was going to fit into it in the whole, you know, the grand scheme of things. And when it came to actually mixing, a lot of the time I was just dropping it in without having to do any real adjustments to the synth demo, you know, because I layered them together, because obviously the piece of music I was writing were for like 1,000 string players, and we had, I think, 30 string players or something. But like having that live element completely changes how it feels. It is true what they say, like, that human element of live recording really does add like a different like 3D layer to the actual piece itself.
Right.
So in that respect, like it was a great experience. But like in terms of like actual composition, it was no different. In terms of workload, it wasn't different really, other than having to physically fly there, to run the session. So I mean, it's interesting. I always like I actually did a vlog. I'm still waiting for permission to post it. Unfortunately, it's been ready for like 2 months, but they haven't given me permission to post it yet. Where I go into these things, and it's genuinely just not a different process, which I thought it would be, which is a pleasant thing, because it means that when I do it in the future, it's not some big daunting thing. So long as I have like an orchestrator who's familiar working with, arseholes like me who don't compose for live players, they compose for the best possible outcome, you know. And sometimes that isn't going live, music's interesting because it is at the end of the day sculpting sound, so it doesn't matter if it's a live player or a synth player. All that matters is you're achieving the right thing you want to do. And sometimes having like the fake unrealistic 1,000 string quartet, just quartet layered 1,000 times to create a unique sound, very unrealistic in a real environment. But if it works in synth, and then you add the live element to add to that, then it's not this mythical beast that's untamable. It's just another little section to it. So the thing it actually taught me is that going forward, it's no big deal. So like if I get a project where they're like, okay, and you're gonna have to get it prepared for like 100 string players, or
no
like
sweat.
100 piece orchestra, it's like,
no sweat.
Okay, it almost literally means nothing.
Right.
It's just, okay, that's just a little side note. That's almost a technicality to the writing process more than an actual thing I focus on, because I tend to write in a way where fakeness is kind of valued, so if the string players like the way it was done, sorry, I know I'm rambling a bit, but the way the orchestrator just kind of made it so the elements of the live players augmented my synth as opposed to replace it. It's no big deal, like it doesn't change anything for me. It's just it means more of a longer and more expensive process at the end of it.
Well, that's what I was wondering, if it in any way stifled your voice or your sound, knowing that it would be played for people, or if you're like, no, fuck it, like it's going to be the same when it gets to the page on the stand. Didn't think about it once. I was like, okay, like what's the best piece of music I can write for this, not what's the most playable piece of music. Like I mean, and there were parts of it that were literally unplayable, like we just dropped. But at the end of the day, it didn't. They could have got it right. That's the thing with these London players as well. They're insanely talented. Like I had this string part, which was basically like this really fast, run that went up and then down and then back up and then back down. And they sight read it first time, which was insane. You know what I mean? They'd man versus machine. You're like, try that.
The funny thing was Jake Jackson, who was actually who was running the desk. He's a great mixer. He looked at it and said, "There's a chance they might not be able to get this," right. Or something like that. Like this is a bit hard. We'll give them a few chances, and if it's because like just before that, actually, like I'd written something which I think was physically unplayable because it was at like 150 BPM. And it was like lots of sixteenths, but it had this was more my ignorance than my writing, is that there was a position change which I didn't know about. So they could play these bits fine because all they had to do was move their fingers, but there was one like part on the upper edge of it that meant they would have had to go up here and then back there.
And they don't really have like 7 fingers on that hand.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. So they physically have to move their hand up the bridge, carry on play, and then move back down. So there would always be like a noticeable kind of fuck up in between the things, which is like, I mean, given enough time, they could have learnt to deal with it. But we had 12 hours there, and I think we were recording like an hour or something like that. I forget how much we recorded in the end. But there was a lot of music to record, and we had like 4 or 5 sessions. So we weren't dilly-dallying. And at the end of the day, like there were samples doing it, which worked, like it got the point across. So we kind of dropped that part. But yeah, then when we came to the second thing, he was like, okay, this is a similar kind of thing, but this one didn't have quite as complex of a position change.
Okay.
And they played it the first time, and there was like one or two missed notes, and the second time they just got it, and it was perfect. And I was like, okay, don't play it again. We don't need it. We've got it. Move on. But
did you have to kick Spitfire out, because they've pretty much taken up residency at our studio?
No, luckily there was we had 2 days all to us, you know, which was good. We had the big room, you know, the big room, the big mixing room, and we you know, and it's a magical place. I remember, you know, when I was getting into it, seeing like videos. I talk about him a lot. Seeing videos with Hans Zimmer, you know, recording his sessions in there. So, you know, I had that little nerd moment where, you know, where I was like, oh, I've seen this before, you know, in videos and stuff. But I tend not to get too starstruck. Like but yeah, like that was one of those moments where I was like, oh, I've seen this, you know, that was a nice feeling. But yeah, in terms of practical writing, nothing changed. It's all the same shit, different day.
Did you get that thing that composers get? I think Johnny Greenwood said like the happiest he ever is when he walks into, you know, the room before the players get there, and you can see his sheet music and all the stands, and he's just like, did you ever get some of that where you're like, I want to start writing for orchestras? Like, I eventually one day, once I'm finished with all this other stuff, and I want to try something else, and I have like the power and stability to do it in my life, this is what I want to do.
It's definitely a nice feeling having all those people focused entirely on something you did. I mean, from a narcissistic perspective, you know, it's a nice feeling. It's like, that was me. But I tend to write music for the sake of writing the best music I can. Like the live player part of it is like an experience. It's like going to a theme park. You know, there's all new things, new toys, and new other people, and things are happening, and then it's over. You know, like, so as an experience, it's a great thing. And I appreciate live music for, you know, the livelihoods of musicians. Like, I don't want live music to go away. But like, I've never really thought about it in that way, you know, like, oh, now I'm just going to write for orchestral. I tend to just write music as it comes to me, like in terms of inspiration, or, you know, what motivates me. Or a lot of the time it's being new. And a lot of the things with orchestral music is there's only so many new things you can do with the orchestra, you know. So that's why I do a lot of sound design and things like that, because I'm trying to do new things. And if I can augment that with live, then absolutely, and I have the opportunity to, absolutely, I'm going to do it. You know, it's like I say, it's a theme park, but people fucking love theme parks, you know. But at the end of the day, it would always be as an addition to trying to create something new, you know, whether that be with synths or with sound design, or, you know, if there's a new thing I can do with an orchestra, then obviously I'd want to do that. But a lot of the time, it's just that like an extra layer. Like, it's an extra 3D layer, you know, that you can add to the thing to make it sound better. But that's more of if anything, a production decision than a compositional one. Do you know what I mean? Like, so the composition, the aim is to be creative, be new, be fresh. And then the live orchestra is more of a production thing for me, where it's adding that extra feeling. You know, it's adding the feeling of the players rather than writing like there's nothing I can't write for synths that, you know, it's quite the opposite. Like, there's things I can write for synths that you physically can't play live, you know. Yeah. So technically I can do more with synths, but they don't have as much feeling to it, which makes the live players more of a, like I say, a production thing than a composition thing. Make sense? It was a bit of a ramble, but
I think it's, well, I'm like, part of what I'm doing is here, like lining up for the next question, but also like trying to understand where you're coming from if I have something to add. And for that, I'll just watch the interview again to get it. So, but
it was a long answer.
It's good. No, this is great. I was talking to what's his name, Daniel Hart. You ever heard of him? He's the composer on Disney's reboot of Pete's Dragon.
Okay.
He replaced Howard Shore. It's Howard Shore, right?
Yeah.
So we were talking about that, and I was like, I wonder if Daniel, if you've ever had to replace anyone. You don't have to name names, but like, if you have.
Yeah.
What was that like? And also, if you don't mind getting into it, have you ever been replaced, and how did you deal with it?
Have I ever been replaced? No, I don't think. I mean, like, there's been projects I couldn't do, and then other people did. Right. You know, I know that Film Right every now and again works with someone else, you know, and it doesn't bother me too much, you know. Like, like, if I can't do it, if I'm replaced, obviously I imagine there's some part of an ego that will take a kick. You know, you're like, you know, I'm trying, and, you know, this little whippersnapper came in and replaced me. But no, have I replaced? I have replaced people before, but a lot of the time, it wasn't like, you know what I mean? It wasn't like a malicious thing or anything like that. It was okay. We're not we're not feeling this. That we want to go more in that direction. And usually, like, a lot of people go in that direction, and I'm often one of the very few in that one.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean?
So a lot of people a lot of people are orchestral first, sound design second, and I'm sound design first, orchestral second. You know, that's the very bare bones way of looking at it. I mean, and it isn't always the case. Sometimes I write purely orchestral things, but like when you think of the music I write, it's very different to what a lot of people aspire to be. You know, like you say, a lot of people aspire to do the live orchestral thing. You know, and that isn't the way I kind of see music. You know, I see music in a different way just because of how I started and how I got into it. You know, so it's a different, it's a completely different approach to me. So, you know, a lot of the time when I've replaced someone, and I've replaced people that I really respect, a lot of the time I didn't even know they were on it. You know, like it was just mentioned offhandedly. Oh, like we had this composer before, you know, but they were in that direction, and the project took a direction that was more in line with what I do. You know, so a lot of the time it's only ever been more of a stylistic change than the thing with composing is there's a barrier to entry. Like you have to be good enough to do the job, which I mean, it's a high barrier, but it's not an unachievable bar by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, there's a lot of work in composers. And then beyond that, it's just stylistic. It's, you know, other than who you know, that's obviously important. But like when they're choosing composers, a lot of the time it's very stylistic, you know, which is why versatile composers get a lot of work at like a kind of middling level, and the guys who are very definable, the guys who are very unique, are the ones who get all the work, because you know they're the ones who, it's the master of one rather than a jack of all. Yeah. So you know, a lot of the time, like I unfortunately struggle to not sound like me sometimes. You know, like when I'm working on a project for someone else, you know, like I'm trying to think of examples, like Call of Duty, for example. I worked on with Jack Wall. You know what I mean? Like I can't write like Jack Wall. Like, so any of the cues that I contributed to the thing will sound like me. You know what I mean? Like I'm kind of easy to spot because I sound like me. And so back to the question, if ever I've replaced someone, it's because they want it to sound like what I do.
Right.
And I'm obviously I'm the best Daniel James out there. That's all I can be. I can only ever be a second-rate John Williams, a second-rate Hans Zimmer. I can only ever be a second-rate someone else. But I think I prefer it that way, you know. And like I say, there's a lot of jobs I'll never get. You know, like I'm not going to get that many romantic comedies or anything. You know, and I do get, like, you look at my credits list, like Metal Gear, Call of Duty, sound design on Terminator.
It was a very northern duty that you just did. Call of Duty.
But you can see the common denominator between them, right? They're a very specific kind of hybrid, dark, aggressive kind of sounding score, like when you imagine what the score would be. You know, like they all tend to take a progression.
There's Ride Along, and there's other stuff too.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if did non-video game things interest you? Like I noticed there's no documentaries on there or anything. Have you ever wanted to just like switch lanes?
To be honest, I tend to do, like, if whatever the project is interesting, I will do it and figure out the rest. Like I say, when I did Monster High, coming into that, I was a purely like hybrid, really aggressive, dark action kind of thing. You know, like I say, all those credits came before Monster High, you know, the Call of Duties and Terminators and things. Metal Gear was before that. You listen to my style then. So when I came onto Monster High, first off, I thought it was an interesting choice to have me have a go at it. But I learned it, you know what I mean? I figured it out. I figured out how I can do that in my style, you know, like, and it's very, very orchestral. If you go back and listen to it, you know, the first cue or two I struggled with, but once I kind of figured out how it works, I just did it. And so I have no doubt, like, and it doesn't bother me if I'm doing something that I've never done before. Like I say, if there's a documentary that interests me and it needs to all be, I don't know why I keep coming back to this, but like super French. You know, like it needs to be stylistically French. You know what I mean? Like I've never written French style or accordion music before, but I could figure it out, you know? But it will always sound like me at the end of the day, and it always have my edge to it. But I can figure it out. So it's, you know, I don't ever write anything off, but the project itself has to interest me. Like if it's a boring project in the first place, you know what I mean? Even if it's in my wheelhouse, like, do I need to do it? You know, that's one of the things. Like I'm not very financially motivated in my career, which usually is like for a lot of people is a big no-no. You know what I mean? Like I don't go where the money is. That's why I don't write that much library music, which is why a lot of people write library music, because it's good money.
Very lucrative. Yeah. It can be anyway.
But I only really work with Epic Score because, you know, Gabe, the guy who owns it, he just kind of lets me run free with it. So, you know, I like that. That's what I love about that company in particular. Like, I get to kind of just do whatever I want, which appeals to me. You know, it's an opportunity to try new things. A lot of the time, I think I had a lot of tracks off my last album just rejected flat out because they were too far. It's not that they were bad. It was just they were too far off of what would be presentable as library music. But you know what I mean? That's why, like, I get to choose. You know, I get to choose what I do a bit more. So yeah, if it interests me, I'll do it. But if it don't,
maybe a documentary on Metal Gear Solid.
I'd do that in a heartbeat.
I bet.
But yeah, it's no big deal.
Okay, so I want to finish by totally stealing something from Christian Henson's one of his earlier videos. I know you watched them because I've seen your comments in there.
Yeah,
that's
does.
That's creepy.
I do love Christian's videos. Like he is doing the vlogs that I wish I could have done. In terms of like they're really high production.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I never got around. Yeah, drones. Like he's going full out on it, and it's just it's just not my style. You know what I mean? Like I look at it and like I wish I was more like that, but just as a human being, I'm not that way. Like I don't think like he does. He's very meticulous, very very polished. He's a very polished individual in everything he does. And a lot of the way I am is very kind of just balls to the wall, just do it and figure it out. You know what I mean?
You white knuckle it.
Yeah, it's a different style completely. Like he does the kind of videos I wish I could do, you know? But it's just not the kind of human I am.
It's funny because I was thinking about that too because I have more time and I'm traveling a lot now, and I was like, I could do something like that. But then I realized like I don't have any fucking stories. Like I don't have like he's got like he's got more miles than you and I do. He's been around the sun a few more times, so he's got more stories and like anecdotes and all this stuff, like really cool things. And like I have nothing. I can't be like, yeah, I bumped into this composer and I'm like secretly talking about Trent Reznor. You know, I can't anyway. So I was like, yeah, I have nothing cool to contribute. But I do want to steal from him a little bit with this Desert Island series that he did, where he named off his EQ and I was gonna say IQ, compressor, reverb, all the stuff that he would take with him if he had to go away. So I want to sort of do this with you. And
okay.
If you're ready, okay, we'll start. And they don't have to be Isotope products, but they should be Isotope products. But they don't have to be Isotope products.
All Isotope.
But they should be Isotope products. No, okay. Desert Island EQ, and well, obviously soft, not hardware.
Okay. Probably the one I always use is the FabFilter Pro Q. Like I just like the visual display of it. Like it's very easy to see where things are. You can also do a thing on it where you freeze. You can freeze the EQ, the spectrogram, whatever. Like the display, the visual representation. You can freeze it, and it'll always, like if it goes higher, it'll move the lines higher, but it never goes back down. So you can literally see at its peak where it was loud. And the thing I like is you can click on the actual waveform and drag it down to match, so that peak will now peak there. You know what I mean? So if I want the peak to go no louder than these ones, I can just drag that down. So I don't actually have to deal with the EQ part. I'm dealing with the actual representation of the waveform, which is, a lot easier to kind of get where you're going. And it's colorful.
It is. They do have a beautiful UI, and they're very like design oriented. But you can change the whole time in Isotopes, Neutron, and Ozone, and all. I'm just kidding.
Sorry. I meant Isotope Neutron. I would take that in a heartbeat.
Checks in the mail. Okay. Compressor.
Probably some 2A, just because it's a composer for noobs. You know what I mean? A 2A for I'm trying to think like compressors like all kind of do the same thing to me. I know some sound different. Distresses are good, and then you can get like the L3. No, what is it? The black one. But whatever. But 2A, I usually just throw on things to see if it works, and a lot of the time it's good enough because it just has a peak, reduce, and then volume. So it's like, how much do you want it compressed, right. And then how much do you want it to turn back up?
There's no ratio or anything like that. So that's the LA2A. Is that UAD's LA2A or?
Yeah, sometimes I use the UAD one. Sometimes I use the T-Rex version, from IK Multimedia. I have like 4 different 2As. I just type in 2A, and then whatever on that day like takes my fancy, I'll click it. And then of course there's like the SSL style ones, where you've got more control. Like Ableton Live had like a built-in one. A lot of the time the tone differences aren't that important because, they're important when you're doing things like rock and stuff because they're a lot more pronounced. There's less instruments. When you're doing orchestral things, like if I put a 2A on a violin, who really notices that? You know what I mean? The tone difference is so fucking minimal. It doesn't matter too much to me. A lot of the time, orchestral parts I don't even compress at all, because they're just kind of fine as it is. Like I say, I use my ears, so I don't think, okay, now is the compression phase. I just listen to it and like, oh, that thing's a bit all over the place dynamically. Let's just calm that down a bit. I try 2A. If that doesn't work, then I'll just try a different one. I'm excited for I don't know why, but I'm excited for the FG Stress, the Slate Digital one, just because it's like a mythical beast that's like, he announced it 3 years ago or something. It's like, it's coming this summer. And then it just disappeared. And then like last year, it was like, it's coming this summer. And then it just never appeared.
Yeah, it's like,
there's rumblings it's going to happen again.
Super slow motion version of what Omnisphere did or Spectrasonics did with Keyscape, where there was they're like 10 minutes. And then we're all up for 4 hours on fucking Twitter at 2 a.m.
Is it out yet?
Yeah.
No, I mean, like the thing with the distressor is that's an EQ, a compressor you can point to that has a very like tone focused sound to it. It's very, so maybe that one even, just cause it's different. When it's got all these little slamming buttons, like the nuke setting and things like that. And I'm going to change it. Fuck it. Let's go with some distressor clone. Just cause.
Yeah, I think I'll edit it so that you say, Ozone 6 is vintage compressor.
Fuck it. Show how changeable I am, Jeff.
You're gonna come out of this looking so weird once it's off the cutting room floor, Daniel. Okay.
To be honest, it'd be a harder thing to make me look normal.
Okay, reverb, Desert Island reverb.
Arts Acoustic reverb, just because I've had it forever.
Mm-hmm. I thought you were gonna say Altiverb. I swear I thought you were gonna say that.
Altiverb's good. I don't use it as much. So, like, there's Arts Acoustic Reverb is an algorithmic reverb which kind of sounds like a convolution reverb in that when you put things through it, you can kind of feel the room more, but you can design the room. I use Valhalla Room whenever I just want to add a long tail to something and I'm not too fussed about it sounding like it's in a room. I just want it to sound like reverb, things like sound design or vocals, something like that. It doesn't need to sound like it's in a specific room. Altiverb I use when I want to fake something that wasn't recorded in a room, but I want it to sound like it was in a room.
Right.
So like if I record a drum dry, like I'll just put like this close mic over here. I'll just put it on like the skin. I'll play something and then I'll put that through Altiverb so it sounds like it was recorded in a hall, and then I'll put that sample through Arts Acoustic. So that it sounds like it's in my room, because that's how I treat samples anyway. So it's just kind of how I it's more of a realizer, make it sound real than it is a reverb to me.
Right.
And then because all my samples, even though they're recorded in rooms with room mics, they go through a reverb in the bus, whatever group they're in anyway. But Arts Acoustic is always on that thing. And the good thing with Arts Acoustic is I can use it to replace Valhalla Room if I want to. And at a stretch, I can use it to replace Altiverb to make it sound like it's in a room. Obviously, Altiverb being a convolution sounds more like a room than Arts Acoustic is. But Arts Acoustic is close enough to sounding like it's in a room that I can adjust. Like if I want the room to be bigger, I can make it bigger. If I want it to be smaller, I can make it smaller. And you can do that with Altiverb, but it kind of is a bit weird and a bit more CPU intensive. So yeah, I'll go with Arts Acoustic just cause.
Fuck it. Okay. Go ahead.
Fuck it.
What were you gonna say?
No, I said fuck it.
Oh, okay.
That's all I was gonna say. That's all I ever say. Swear words. I get told off a lot by my commenters.
You probably get
Does he need to swear
too.
so much?
You probably get demonetized too by YouTube. Did you?
Did they do that? No, I probably would if I advertised it. But
I think they were threatening to do it, and a lot of people were like freaking out.
But a lot of people are like, "Fuck that!" No, but it's just swearing is part of my vocabulary. Yeah. I don't think I've never seen cursing as a sign of intelligence or lack thereof. It's either part of your vocabulary or it's not. It's how you're raised. And I swear a lot. It's part of me. I apologize. You're gonna have to do a lot of beeps if you're worrying about demonetization.
I knew we'd get around to your childhood. No.
Secretly, I just use these interviews as like a therapy session.
Right. I'm honored. No, I'm kidding.
Honored.
Okay. Let's stay with the swearing. A fucking saturator. What's the one that you take with you to the island? I know it's weird. Saturators are really broad. I know it's weird. If it's too nebulous, then we'll skip that and go to something else. But
a saturator.
Just something that has like harmonic distortion that's pleasing. You know.
Most people would say something like decapitator, which I do use all the time. Like if I want some buzzy saturation or something. There's also new slate ones which I like, but I'd probably take something like Homicide, which is a multi-band distortion unit. But like if I wanted to, I could just use one band and put a saturator on it because it has like loads of different distortion types that you can use. But then also having the opportunity, if I wanted to just completely fucking mangle something, you know, that's important to me too. So like I wouldn't take a what's it called, decapitator. I wouldn't take that just because it does one thing really well, but it's very unflexible in that regard, you know.
Okay, we'll just say
Homicide.
We'll just say Trash 2 from Isotope. Moving along.
Trash 2 by Isotope.
Solo string.
It's funny because I actually have a lot of Isotope, but I use it very surgically. You know what I mean? Like I go to Isotope when I want something specific done. Like I have a lot of things that kind of I have a lot of plugins that all do the same things, and a lot of the time I just use them as splash damage. You know what I mean? More like shotguns. Mm-hmm. Whereas I use Isotope like a sniper rifle when I'm doing something very specific.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. The other stuff is like the buckshot, and then you pull out the deer rifle for Isotope's the deer rifle.
Exactly, for specific things. Yeah. String library. Is that what you said?
Solo string library, please.
I don't really do solo strings.
No?
I only really ever use
one.
Like
Via Harmonic a lot. You were touting that one for a bit.
The Via Harmonic solo violin, but I mean that's only a violin. I mean, like it depends. I have the solo cello, but I haven't used it yet. Like I haven't even opened it up. Like that's, I feel bad about that. But I use the Tina Guo one a lot. You know, the Tina Guo cello, which was great when it first came out, and it got even better when they added the legato script to it because now it's actually usable as a patch. You know, like I can play melody lines on it. Because it used to have like a kind of slow attack, which made doing like actual melodic writing difficult. And it does genuinely sound like the way Tina Guo plays a cello, which is very vibrato heavy, which isn't perfect in all circumstances, but like when you want it, it's great. But yeah, so I mean, like that. Can I split it between two? So it'd be like the Bohemian Violin by Via Harmonic and the Tina Guo by Cinesamples. Can I have that?
I'll allow it.
I'll allow it.
Don't do it again.
Was that a British accent?
I don't know what that was. We'll get rid of it in post. I'm sorry. I'll be Canadian. I'm sorry. Have you been to Canada?
Wait. No.
No.
I've
you laugh. You're like, no. Fuck. No. Kidding me?
Isn't Canada part of America? No.
Anyway. Interview's done. Okay. Strings, big string ensemble library. I know you've probably gone through quite a few.
Cinematic Studio Strings is the one I use the most.
Really?
Yeah, just because it's got the tone I like. The thing is, I counted it the other day. I think I have 18 string libraries. 18? It may have been in the 20s even, or at least libraries that have significant string sections to them. So I include things like Albion in that count up, which has everything, but it also has a lot of strings. So yeah, I do most of the writing with Cinematic Studio Strings. Then I augment that with like an ensemble library, you know, like an Albion or Symphobia, something like that, just for like different tones, a lot of it is a mixed reason, but like I compose with Cinematic Studio Strings because the tone's good, the response is good, like for melody writing, and it has good short notes, and you know it has good layouts with the patches, you know, so changing with the key switch is very obvious with it. Good all round string library, to be honest. I use it on pretty much everything. It's big enough to do big things and small enough to do smaller things, which is rare for some, because they either go really big or really small. But that's the way I always say it. Like Spitfire do great string libraries, but they're they're great for score. You know what I mean? You can make them go big and epic trailer music, but you have to put in effort to get them up there usually.
They're kind of single application or single purpose sometimes.
Right. They're good at writing music, like score music, orchestral music. And a lot of the time, a lot of the scores I do are big and epic and stuff. So cinematic studio strings, I can take there a lot easier. I'll layer it with something like LA scoring strings, which goes big. It's easier to go big than it is to make soft. So it's like the opposite to the Spitfire thing. Symphobia is just balls to the wall big. So yeah, that's kind of my middle ground. And I'll layer it with like Cine samples, Cine strings if I want it big, or Spitfire libraries if I want it small. You know what I mean? But it's always the middling, like it's the one that does both. So that's what I start and go with. So I take that one just because it kind of does all the things. It's the Swiss Army knife of strings.
Jack of all trades.
That needs. Wait, do Isotope do any strings?
I've got you thinking in that mindset. This is great.
Yeah.
Brass, or I guess you'd say brass. Would you say brass?
Brass.
Do you have a posh accent or no? I can't tell if it's posh.
Well, it's funny. I actually used to live up north, so I would have I used to have like the Jon Snow northern accent like that. So I would used to say brass, but I say brass now because I had a southern accent. So yeah, brass is Cinebrass. Like I don't know if they sell it as a bundle, but like the Pro and the Core versions, I'll take those just because I use those more than anything. And there's one patch in Albion 1, the old version of it, which is like French horn and trombones layered, which I don't think exists. I mean, they have it in the new version, but it's mixed differently or something. The old version of it I use all the time for chords, but I don't use anything else in them to warrant it being the Desert Island one. So probably the Cinebrass, because that is my go-to brass sound for sure. Yeah.
How do you feel about orchestral tools? I noticed they haven't really come up in this.
Orchestral tools is okay. So orchestral tools have I do have their brass library now. I take that back, but the Cinebrass again is like my middling instrument. And then if I want it to go soft, I use the Spitfire ones. If I want it to go loud, I use the orchestral tools ones. Do you know what I mean? Like it depends where I'm going. And like so most of the time when I work, I pick one that kind of sits in the middle and can go either way pretty easily. And I write with that. And then I augment it with libraries that do soft easily and ones that do loud easily. So orchestral tools go big and loud really easily. Spitfire tends to go really quiet and score-ish more easily. I actually do. I also use a lot of the orchestral tools brass, the orchestral brass. I use a lot of the solo instruments from that. They're absolutely killer. But then and I use so like in Cinebrass I use like the 12 horns patch for going big. But then I'll layer it with Metropolis Arc 1's French horn section, which I think is at 8 or 9. You know, it's for like completely over the top sounds. You know. And sometimes I do like orchestral tools, Metropolis Arc 1. I use a lot in strings as well for going big.
Okay.
Some of the sections they recorded are so huge and fat, like the low string. I forget what they call it, but like the low string thing has so much balls to it.
It's so guttural.
It's like, like that's the thing. Like if I was on a desert island, I probably wouldn't sound the same way as I sound now because a lot of my writing is just layers from everywhere. You know what I mean? I never just use one library for anything. Everything always uses something else to augment it. I think that's
so cool because a lot of people have this weird paranoia about blending things together. It even gets to this point where they're like, oh, well, they were recorded in this room and this other library that I'm using was recorded in a dry room and that one's wet, and how I mix reverb. So I think it's kind of refreshing that you're like...
I could not care less about that. Like, it doesn't matter to me because they're all going to run through the same reverb on the group bus anyway, so they all kind of have a similar vibe. All that matters to me is does it sound good when I play it? Yes, okay, then I'll use it. If not, then no, you know. And that's what I mean by soft. So like the Spitfire stuff, you know, recorded in air is very, you know, it's got a lot of ambience to it, a lot of stuff, so it lends itself to this kind of quieter, more, you know, ambient feel, whereas like the orchestral tools, they're not drier, but it recorded in a different room, which is a lot more kind of active and live, you know. It's like more energetic. There's more energy in that room for whatever reason, so it's easier to make it go big because the room allows for it. Cinebrass has like the Sony stage, which seems to be good for both. And that's what I mean. So like I always layer it depending on it. And this is what I said earlier about recording live. It's a production choice at that point. So the composition, like composition libraries, I choose whatever fits. Wait, is that phone ringing?
Is that call?
No, sorry. Okay. No, it was my phone just rang and then it stopped. So like the same with live players. It's a production choice. So I choose something for composition that does a little bit of everything, and then I layer it like from a production standpoint. What can make it sound what I want it to sound like more, and then usually that's just pulling in a library that does that kind of thing easier. So yeah, it's never just one thing, you know. It's always a lot of things. But yeah, so I would take Cinebrass. Is that where we are? Are we still on brass? Yeah, I'd take Cinebrass.
Okay. Yeah, we're still on brass. I dated a
take
girl.
The brass.
I dated a girl from the Midlands, and she told me that the giveaway to find out like they have like a posh or a not posh accent is grass and bath. Someone not posh would say grass or bath, and posh would say grass or bath or mastering. Mastering.
Well, that's it's literally a north-south divide. Yeah. So what the implication there is, everybody who lives down south is posh, and everybody who lives up north is poor.
What about the Midlands people?
No one cares about the Midlands. Like in England, there's like the north and the south, and then the Midlands just exists. You know what I mean? It's like America. You have like the west coast of California, the east coast of New York. You sometimes have the south of Texas, and then there's just everything in between that no one really cares about. You know what I mean? People care about it, obviously.
Sweetwater. No, I'm just kidding.
But you never talk about the midsection. Right. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what it is in England. I mean, unless you live there, no one in the south ever thinks about the Midlands. They may think about the north, like Manchester, Liverpool, but no one's like, oh yeah, that Birmingham. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're not together anymore, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's all right.
Okay. Percussion library.
Screw the Midlands.
That'll be the title of this video, by the way. Screw the Midlands with Daniel James.
Screw the Midlands. Percussion's weird because I'm a percussion horse. So like my percussion setup has no one thing do everything. I'd probably choose, sound-wise, I'd probably choose Hans Zimmer percussion.
Okay. Just I'm sending you to a fucking desert island, so pick one, Daniel.
I'd probably pick the Hans Zimmer percussion. It doesn't have everything, but what it does have sounds really good. You know what I mean? So I could make do.
But ideally, what do you do? What do you like? You know.
I mean, so my setup always has like Hans Zimmer percussion, and what else do I have? I have a lot of things in there. I'm like trying to visualize it. So I have some Damage in there. I have some Project Sam True Strike in there. I have some Orchestral Tools percussion in there. What else do I have? Like I have all the Heaviosity things in there. And that's what I say. Like percussions are different. It's a weird one for me because like percussion like there's no real setup for percussion which is correct. You know what I mean? There's a correct setup for strings, you know, orchestral strings. There's a correct setup for brass, but percussion, you could literally use anything. Like I could use this Pepsi that I've been down in the whole time as a percussive instrument. I can use this table as a percussive instrument. Mm-hmm. So they're all different sounds. So like I'm not stuck to any one library. Like I'm not stuck to the conventions of like the percussion setup of having bongos, congas, bass drum, you know, Piatti cymbal. You know, like I'm not stuck to that. So for me, it's more like overall tone. And I think the Hans Zimmer percussion has enough flexibility in with the mic positions you get and stuff to kind of take it where you need it to. So that's usually the centerpiece for a lot of what I do. But then like the things like 8Dio's percussion library is so realistic sounding, it's beyond belief. I use a free library called G-Town, which is from way back in the days. It was one of like the, you know, back in the Giga sample days, but it was free. I use that because it just sounds amazing, you know. So percussion's a tough one, but yeah, I'll go with Hans Zimmer percussion for that, just because it's got enough flexibility in how I can make it sound that I can make it sound like what I want it to, you know.
And I also find that percussion, out of all those things that we mentioned, the desert island stuff, is the most sympathetic, and like it's the stuff that can be mangled with dynamics or time-based effects the most without losing its character. Like it only enhances it. Whereas if you throw a violin through Trash 2, it's no longer a violin; it's something else. Whereas percussion, you can keep it grounded in percussion and just like enhance it and make it even better with time-based.
And percussion's the easiest thing to understand for humans. It's like it's the first instrument. I mean, every human, I think, alive probably, and this is a bit of speculation, but has probably at some point been walking down the road and their feet have like made a beat, you know what I mean? And they've acknowledged this, you know, like doom, doom, and then you know what I mean? It's just a percussion thing. Like we kind of understand rhythm in that way, almost like fundamentally. It's like instinctual. Like we never learned to understand rhythm, like actively. You know, we never went to school to learn it. But you can walk down the road and understand that there's a rhythm there. Mm-hmm. You know, so percussion to me is like the oldest instrument. So that's usually where I start tracks. It's just how does the rhythm of it feel? And so, you know, I'm quite particular about having every percussion library ever made. So that was a difficult one. But yeah, in terms of production, which is an interesting. Christ, this lead's going everywhere. Like from a production standpoint, that's how I think about a lot of the music I write. Like I noticed that as I was talking to you then, is that like a lot of the decisions I make are production focused rather than compositional one. Because like I say, a lot of the time it's more it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Like you can say I love you a million different ways. If you whisper it tenderly, it means, you know, it means you love that person. If you just shout it, I love, you know, like a football fan would shout at a football game. You know, it doesn't have the same meaning. You know what I mean? So it's not so much what you're actually saying with notes, it's more how you say them. So like, at least that's how I think of music, you know. So a production is a very big part of getting the how it sounds to be correct. As a, you know, notes are notes, you know, obviously it's important, but it's not. It's hard to tell someone you love them by saying, I want to bury you in the ground, you know? Yeah. So what you say does have significance, but it's more important how you say it, you know, to me. So that's why I choose a lot of things based on how it would work production-wise rather than compositionally.
And I think that's also a very sound designery way to think of things, which is right. What you come from. That's your. I'm just gonna. Yeah. I'm gonna tell you what you come from, and I'm gonna
tell me how I think. Yeah. Tell me how I think.
Last soft synth.
Last. Omnisphere, just because flexibility.
It's so confident. You're just like Omnisphere, no brainer.
Well, it comes with a huge sample bank as well. So yeah. For all the other sections that I missed out on, I could just layer them with Omnisphere.
I thought you were going to say Phobos. I don't know how to say that like North Americanly, but I don't know.
Phobos. Is that how it's pronounced? Phobos?
I don't
Phobos?
know. I don't know. I think BT doesn't want us to know how to pronounce that.
That guy exists on a different plane anyway, so it's probably a made up like ethereal word. Phobos. Let's go with Phobos. That seems correct. But yeah, Omnisphere, like if it was down to synths, I use Diva a lot, you know, by Yuhi and Zebra I use all the time. I use a lot of Serum because it's very aggressive sounding. But in terms of just general synth, I'd probably go Omnisphere just because it's really easy to program. You know, so if I want to get a specific sound, I can do it very quickly in Omnisphere. If I want to get a creative sound, you know, it's just easy to do in it. But if I want a specific sound, you know, I have a lot of different actual, you know, different subsynths that I will use. But you know, no, I'm not too particular. Like at the end of the day, you can make any synth sound like any other synth. It's just how easy do you get to it? You know, how easy do you get to the sound you want? And Omnisphere can get to a lot of sounds I want very quickly, whereas like it's hard to make Serum sound very soft and lush.
Yeah, I have to agree that Isotope's Iris 2 is the superior soft synth.
Iris 2, oh fuck, Iris 2. I take Iris 2. Well, that's why I told you, like the Isotope things I use for very specific things, whereas everything else is like kind of just. I spread wide as opposed to surgically. But if I need something specific, I do use Isotope for a lot of things, you know, so.
Okay.
So there is that.
That's it, man. That's all.
I'm sorry. There's no free. Isotope in it. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I want you to be honest. I still like our products. No, I'm just kidding.
I love them. I mean, you've seen my user account. I own most of it, so.
I haven't seen your user account. I sent that off to one of our grunts in customer care, so I don't deal with them.
You know. Well, if you saw my account, you would know that I own practically everything by you guys.
And I think you do own everything. It's not a bunch of NFRs. Like you put money into Isotope, I think.
Yeah, I'm keeping it propped up, yeah. Single-handedly.
Daniel James, thank you so much for being part of this video. Like I use the word delight. I know it's a bit we can't use that word anymore. It's a bit silly to use that word. Delight. It's delightful, but it is truly delightful, and I really thank you for making the time. This means a lot to me.
You're more than welcome.
Okay.